Hello and welcome to our podcast from Bournemouth University today. I'm Steph Farmer. I'm a member of the RTS committee for the Southern region, and I've got an amazing guest here today, Georgia Brown, who's going to be talking to us about all things to do with media industry and other things besides. So we're going to have a nice chat today about that. So Georgia, just a little bit about your background. Obviously, you've had an amazing career in the industry, in areas of development and commissioning. Georgia, you were obviously the head of Amazon Europe, so you were commissioning for Amazon right across the board there. And your most recent role, I've got to get this title right, is Chair of the UK Screen Sector Skills Task Force. Is that right?
That is right. Well done. Yes, that is right.
Brilliant. Good job I had it written down. So obviously we're going to have a chat about that and talk about those sort of kind of nitty gritty of the report that you've just sort of published a bit later. But let's go back a bit, because you're a graduate of BU, aren't you?
I am, yes. I graduated in 2005
Brilliant.
on the TV production course here.
Okay. So 2005, so you've had a nice visit on campus today. Tell us about what your impressions are of the campus and how it's changed.
I mean, it's incredible. Partly it hasn't changed at all because there's such a lovely spirit here. But it's dramatically changed in terms of its facilities. I mean, I'm blown away by the sophistication of some of the studios that you guys have, the equipment, the setup. I mean, I think there's people in the industry who'd be very enviable of some of the kit you guys have got. But that's fantastic because you're really setting your students up to go into a world where they will be very future-proofed, which I think is really important. And as always, it's always set Bournemouth apart, you know, being very on trend in terms of the industry and in touch with what the industry is doing. So I think it's just incredible coming down here and seeing all the new buildings and the facilities. The kit room hasn't changed much. It still feels very familiar, but no, it's wonderful. It's fantastic.
Great. It sounds like you've had a good tour around and seen a lot of stuff
wonderful
today. That's good. So tell us then, take us back a bit then. How did you get started? What was it like for you when you first went into the industry?
Well, it was a challenge. It was a real challenge. And I think it's good to say that because for people coming out, I think the idea that you walk straight into a job is just not always the reality. And I left university and I was lucky enough at Bournemouth, you know, it's very affiliated with the industry. So I'd done a placement with the BBC during my time here, which really was quite instrumental in what I then went on to do. But, you know, I left uni, moved back home, and it was a good, I'd say easily kind of 15 months, I suppose, till I got my first job. And in that time I was endlessly coming up and down on the train to London, applying for every runner's position there was going. I didn't have a car and I didn't have in London. And at that point, and probably still now, that really went against me. And lots of people saying, yep, that's great. You've got the degree, but you don't have a car. So you can't easily be a runner for us. And you don't live in London. So you're not going to be here for a 5 a.m. start when we need you to go, you know, down the road and pick up whatever and take it to wherever.
Yeah.
So I had to say I found the first year out very hard. And I think I worked in recruitment just as a job to get some money together to try and move to London, realising that was the path. But it really was hard. And it wasn't until I got that first break at BBC Worldwide, which completely changed the trajectory of what I then went on to do, that things really kind of took off for me. But it was interesting because I had never considered not working within production per se. That's all I assumed existed. So finding out about the commercial side of television and the breadth of roles, what it did, what it meant for the actual production side, really just kind of sparked my imagination, was something I'm still deeply passionate about and fascinated by and talk to people a lot about as a really interesting alternative to the very pure production route. But it wasn't easy, and I think it's good that people hear that because it's not that easy, you know, to think you're going to walk out and straight into a job.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, it's interesting that hasn't really changed, has it? In some ways, you know, it's still really difficult to get, you know, get your foot in the door and get a career going. And as you say, you know, often it's those jobs that you take when you're very first out there. It was the same for me, you know. I mean, I think I started off as a assistant editor, and you know, a trainee editor for somebody who wanted me to be their PA. And I was like, no, I really don't want to be your PA. But if you know, and then I did that for a little while and then didn't go down that route. So it is about, you know, where you go and where those doors, you know, open an opportunity, don't they, to something different you hadn't considered.
It really is. And I do think, you know, starting out now, I think being more open-minded about the routes to getting in, the routes to entry, and I'm not saying think strategically, because who knows? I still discover jobs today. I think, God, I didn't even know that existed as a position that you could be paid for to do. How incredible. But I think being a bit more open-minded and trying your best, I know the university do a lot of this, to think, how do I make myself the most kind of robust against market downturns, or because we are going to go through this as an industry. We always do. We're very resilient overall as an industry, and the freelance sector is incredible, and we survive on them. But there will be periods where you won't work. So how can you skill yourself up to be, I suppose, more mobile and portable? Because you won't always be able to guarantee, over the next 50 years of your career, you're going to be in work, and that's a real challenge. And I'm in awe of people who go down the freelancer route, because it is a real challenge. And we need to do a lot more to support them and make sure that we are setting students up to understand the realities of that, and to kind of, really tool themselves up with the right soft skills and hard skills in order to navigate that.
So tell us more about this, your most recent role, and what was that based on? It was based on the BFI skills review, wasn't it? Do you want to...
Yes. So the BFI in June of 22 released a report talking about a skills crisis, and effectively saying we don't have enough crew, looking at the sector vision and where we thought the industry might be going in terms of hours and commissions. We don't have enough crew in order to facilitate these productions and get these shows made. And you hear this a lot. Again, every year there's a different take on this. And when I read that and looked at the data, I agree with some of what was in that report, but a lot of it I didn't agree with. And I guess that's just the privilege of sitting where I've sat on the buyer side and seeing the industry in a bit more of a holistic perspective, maybe. But the truth is, lots of these reports are written, and they're written about a moment in time, and those moments in time can change in a matter of days. And it did, I spoke to the BFI, and they asked me to put together a task force and to chair that and summon the industry. They wanted a kind of industry-led and localised response to the skills challenge that we were facing. And so the first thing I did was convene the industry. And for me, it was really important that we had the sector covered. It couldn't just be, I get very frustrated when I hear that we're representing the industry and actually they're missing out major broadcasters or major, regional, clusters. So it was really important we were represented both in terms of the breadth of buyers on that group, but and that includes people like Warner Brothers, Disney, the big players in the market that really influence the UK sector, whether they're inward investors or they're local players, but also regionally being represented, because so often you look at these things and it's made up of a load of Londoners, and that's just not the reality of the world that we work in. So we put the task force together, and then again, I kind of tackled it as I would tackle a CEO job of anything. I kind of said, right, well, there is a problem that we're looking at, but it's a problem of a moment in time that's going to change very quickly. So rather than doing yet another report that isn't relevant by the time we publish it, let's just take a step back. Let's just take a beat here. Not forget this problem. It is a problem right now, but let's take a step back and think about how we can put something in place to effectively change the foundations of how we work mechanically to future-proof ourselves. Because it's really easy, and what I noticed when I started to delve into the skills world is there is incredible work happening. Lots of passion and lots of goodwill to change things. But a lot of that sits with lots of individuals in lots of companies, little, big, it doesn't matter, but lots of little individuals who all have slightly different views based on their slightly different North Star goal of what that particular company needs to do, that particular region, etc. There is no one holistically looking across the whole thing going, hang on a minute, as an industry, what do we need to do to try and future-proof this so we're not consistently up against a wave that's going to be changing tomorrow? Because it is, very, we change a lot. We're resilient, but it is up and down. So we decided to tackle it slightly differently, which was to, again, not necessarily submit a report of this is the strategy for skills. We were like, but why isn't there a strategy for skills? Who owns the strategy for skills? Take a step back. What would that even look like if we were going to try and put it together? The real crux of the problem is the boom and bust and how we handle each kind of variance. And so what we've tried to do in the first report is preliminary put together a kind of idea for if we were going to have a a strategic partner, and we think partnerships is critical to this. A strategic partner who could be a voice of the industry, a voice of the industry to the governments. They have just one singular voice versus having, again, 25 people telling them slightly different things depending on the company hat they're wearing at the time. Someone who could kind of convene the industry and deploy information, gather data on behalf of the industry and be very transparent with that data. You know, Amazon, when I came in and wanted to invest in skills, I was hearing lots of the production say to me, we don't have production managers, we don't have enough accountants, we don't have enough of this or that. And I'd say, how do you know? Like, prove it. Where should I put my money? I've got lots of money I want to put into skills development. I need proof that that's where, and no one can show me any data. No, I can't pick up the phone to anyone and goes, yes, categorically, based on where everyone's investing, here's a gap. No one can show me that. It's just lots of hunches of people chatting in corners, and it's echoed around the industry. And again, what was interesting at Amazon, I put a lot of money into entry level training, you know. And then when we did an investment survey, which is one of the first things I did as part of our task force, to actually get data, we're all guessing here, we've all got hunches, let's actually just categorically understand this. It was the first time the industry's ever done it. They all disclosed their data to us to look at a few things. How much are they investing? What are they investing it into? And then really important for us to unpick this problem is, what's the impact of the investment that you're making? Because again, you know, with all these big players at a table, no one could tell us whether the money they were spending was good money. In which case, what's the point? Right? Yes. You know, if it's not helping people and making an impact, why are we spending it? Or should we be spending it elsewhere? So again, the task force came together. We kind of took a step back and tried to look a bit more structurally about how we would future-proof this. And we did this big investment survey. And that gave us lots of really interesting ways to think about this. And the first was, again, what we need is absolutely to have a strategic body who kind of owns skills per se. They don't own how local companies would do it. They can't own how it would roll out locally. We need local implementation, and that's critical. But there needs to be a bit more of a cohesive strategy around how we future-proof people in the industry to kind of ride the storm, so to speak. And then we also looked at another pillar was kind of, how do we have sustainable growth and sustainable careers? And that pillar was all around, I talked about it earlier, but mobility. How do you make people skill up so when there is a downturn, they can keep working? Because the trouble is, we have this mass exodus, and how do we get people back again? It's really challenging. And I think, again, we've been slightly spoiled the last 7 years. That's over. We're not going back to that point. We're absolutely not. So people have to have a reality now of, there will be periods where you are maybe not on set. So what do you do in those periods? How do we make sure you're skilled up and able to take other things on in that time? And then lastly, it was all about work-based training. And what we realised from the investment survey was the only investment that had any real impact for any of the people putting money into skills and development was work-based learning. And that's really important, I think, particularly when you think about HE institutions. You know, how do we do more training placements? How do you connect more with the industry? Because ultimately, you know, all of those kind of shadowing schemes where people are directly on a set learning day to day, that's more impactful for them than being sat in a classroom being told this is how set works. So that's why it's joyful for me to come here and see Bournemouth's amazing studios and see all of your students every lunchtime doing their programs, writing their scripts, shooting their pilots. Like, they're really living and breathing as you would on a set, right? And that's so important. But the next step on from that is sitting on a live set, where now you have massive risk, right? Financially, you have buyers breathing down your necks, you've got delivery dates, you've got, you know, all manner of pressures are added when it's a real life scenario. And that's kind of that more soft skill. How do you train people to cope with that?
Absolutely. It's often, you know, we notice a big difference when the students come back from placements.
Oh, yeah.
It's etiquette on the set, isn't it? It's knowing, you know, exactly how to kind of, you know, and that's a soft skill that you can't, it's difficult to teach, really. I think we do our best, and we try and give students, you know, as real an experience as possible. But I think, that we need that collaboration with industry to help provide those opportunities. And, you know, the work I do with Red Balloon, obviously, is to help try and, you know, offer opportunities to students to work on real projects. But obviously, they're not the same scale as working on a project for Amazon or Netflix, and you know, they are a sort of stepping stone towards that. But small production companies can't often offer that, can they? And so,
well, it comes down to your budgeting, right? It really comes down to it. It really, and we talk a lot about, where does the responsibility sit for this, you know? And everyone have a different argument. You know, ultimately, broadcasters dictate the budgets of the show. They sign off the budgets of that show. and at Amazon, we had a very fast rule. The only way you would ever get a show developed with us or greenlit with us was if you had baked into your budget various schemes. It could be a stepping up, a shadowing, depending on, do we want HOD stepping up? Do we want, different shows had different schemes that we'd put around it. But that was the only way you would be able to get a green light. And some do that and some don't. And of course, at Amazon, you have a luxury if you do have bigger budgets. You're making less shows a year. You can be more concentrated on the shows that you're working on. You can maybe take more time. Lots of people don't have that luxury.
No.
And it's not mandated to do that. And as much as the impetus is on how do we make sure our students or apprentices, or whichever route people are coming through into the industry, that the new entrants coming in are au fait with set etiquette and feeling okay in that environment. The other flip of that is, and this was the interesting part of the study we've done, is how do you make sure those kind of senior HODs are trained up in order to lead and in order to have trainees on set. And that's, again, we did lots of focus groups and I spoke to lots and lots and lots of people throughout the last 7 months of doing this project. And what was really interesting for me again was, again, the real disconnect between maybe broadcaster producers saying this is what we want, and then the people on set having to actually deploy that. In the corporate world, when I step up to manager level, I'm sent on management training courses. Yeah. I'm given leadership training courses. I'm giving manual. There's every training. I'm given unconscious bias training, psychological safety training, all of this training, which you really take for granted. And it really struck me, and I'd never really computed it before, that you suddenly speak to people and realize, because of the freelance nature, you're transactional, you're on to the next, no one's pausing to go, have you ever been trained to manage someone? Because it's a big step up, making sure that you're not only responsible for delivering your day, but then 10 other people's days, is a real interesting skill that people need to learn. And there's a lot of that has to happen in order to make our sets more equitable and safe, and an environment for new entrants to come in and feel like they can actually have an exchange which is fair and they're learning too. Because, you hear so many really sad cases of trainees going on sets and they're shoved in a corner and told make tea because it's just easier. We're busy, we've got to get a day done, we've so many minutes to get through, just sit back and watch.
Yeah, it's got to be valuable, hasn't it? Yeah, it's got to be proper training. And as you say, mentoring and coaching is a skill in itself, isn't it? So
it really is,
it's really important.
And also some people don't want to do that. It's not what some people sign up for. So it's really interesting is how do you professionalize a freelance world, which is largely unregulated, and there is no one person saying, in other jobs I've had, if you don't do this piece of training, then your access is cut off. You can't use your laptop, so you have to do it. That doesn't happen in a freelance world. And also, it's really interesting when you look at the cost of that as well. Understandably, lots of senior folk on set or HODs are saying, that's fine if you want me to add this to the pressure of my workload, but am I going to be paid for that? Will I get extra remuneration, or what credit am I getting to take on these now 10 people underneath me to make sure they are now safe and I'm also delivering? And so it all needs unpicking. It all needs a bit of a deep breath and sitting back and going, hang on a minute, how do we make this shared pool of freelancers? And we do all share them. We can all come with company hats on, but ultimately there'll be a Netflix show today, a BBC show tomorrow, an ITV show, an HBO show after that. So we all are collectively invested in these people, and we need them, and we need to invest in them as human beings. So I think that's kind of the next step of what we're now starting to do is, well, what would that roadmap look like? And it all comes down to funding, as always with these things, and I'm picking that funding mechanism. Yeah,
because the first thing people will say, well, who's going to pay for that?
Who's
paying for that? So is it
exactly
the commissioners? Is it the channels? How is that going to kind of filter through? Isn't it?
There's no answer on that yet. I mean, the interesting thing was, again, and it was interesting when the BFI report came out, and they suggested there should be a 1% levy to fund this. We did the investment survey which showed we're spending more than 1% already. So actually the industry is spending over 104 million a year on training and investment, but it's going in the wrong places. Only 27% of that is going mid to senior level, and that's wrong. We're losing and hemorrhaging people at mid to senior level for various life choices. Some you might not be able to keep because it's a life choice, things happen to them, but a lot of that is investment into people in probably the wrong areas, and that needs rebalancing. I don't necessarily think we need more money, but the money needs to be readdressed in terms of where is it going and that critical impact it has at where you deploy that capital.
Yeah, because I was looking, there was some figures. So it's something like, was it 21% of the workforce are over 50, but in other areas, in other industries, it's at least 31% and more.
Exactly.
So you've obviously got,
huge problems.
And, the workforce is getting older. So you're going to need to employ quite a few older and experienced people.
And you've just hit the nail on the head. We're hemorrhaging experience. It's not just an issue of the positions, and it's so funny when we talk about skills. That's why we've tried to move it away from the skills problem, because you think about skill as quite a transactional. You're trained to do a certain thing. It's experience, and we're losing years of experience of people who can go on set, foresee and think, hang on a minute, I can see what's happening here. I know what the outcome's going to be, and I need to stop it. Just that experience that sometimes you just get from years of being there. We're really lacking, and I think that and the risk that puts on the safety of that set, and the money that is being spent there is a huge problem. This is people's lives, and sets are dangerous places, right? So losing that experience is a real problem.
And stress, there was a note about people being promoted too early, and I guess that's because you've got people leaving who are the older experienced ones. You're trying to bring younger people forward who haven't got that experience. They then get very stressed, and their mental health suffers, and then they leave. So it's a
vicious cycle. But it does come down to it comes down to many things. First of all, funding is critical, and I think as an industry, having an honest conversation. I'm really proud of the work we've achieved, because we really have got the industry talking for the first time in a room in a bit more of an aligned manner, taking kind of corporate company hats off and thinking more as industry folk trying to future-proof this. Where will the funding have the most impact, like collectively, as a collective pool of funding versus, this is what X broadcaster wants to pump into their thing for their great press release, right? It's not all about the press release. We've got to make some impact here. So I think changes are going to happen because of that. We're losing talented people, we're losing experience. That means the quality will be dampened. That means there's much higher risk to all of us when we're commissioning shows, and you want to make sure you're getting return for that investment, and people's safety is at risk. So there's a lot at play here.
And we are an important industry, aren't we? We're bringing a lot of money into this country.
Yes.
Is this sort of plateauing of work is happening? Not just in the UK, though, obviously, because of the writer's strike in US. That's obviously caused a ripple effect presumably throughout the world. So it's obviously had an effect right across the board. Yeah. But I think we're talked about. We're one of those industries, aren't we? I think they kind of pull us out of the bag every now and again and say, "Oh yes, amazing creative industries," but then we're just kind of left to sort of get on with it. So are you really hopeful that you can bring about some change with this report? Do you think people, it will be a sort of roadmap to things changing and it becoming more sustainable generally?
Yes, I think what we're doing for the first time is starting to unpick again the foundations of it, because what's happened now, skills is so fragmented. As I said, it confuses me, and I've been across it and very into it the last 9 months. It is deeply confusing. There are hundreds of bodies, institutions, funds, schemes. You don't quite know where to look, to be perfectly frank. None of it has any holistic joined up plan of this is why we're doing it to get here. Corporately they might, lots of individual corporate companies or, and the truth is it's very hand to mouth. Lots of these schemes are set up by certainly broadcasters funding a huge amount, but then lots of public money. And that is hand to mouth. Will it still be here next year? Who knows? There's a change of government. Will we still have funding? We don't know. So the conversation for survival for these companies becomes around funding, not how are we making long-term impact. And I think that's the problem. Everything that's been done to date, again, really, really great work. I don't ever want to downgrade what's been done, because it's quite formidable, the work that and the changes we've seen in diversity on and off screen. But ultimately, it's not enough. If put this all together, it's just not enough, because we need to, as I said, come together and really focus on the pillars and the areas that we all want to invest in, versus this slightly fragmented approach to deploying capital.
So what can people like ourselves, like Bournemouth University and Royal Television Society, what can we do as kind of accessories, if you like, to the industry? We're obviously trying to provide opportunities for young people and train them up. What more can we do? What would you like to see?
I think there's a few things. First of all, we talked a lot about strategy and partnership, and what we really noticed in skills was it's quite a competitive landscape. And that really shocked me, actually. It's very competitive. People are competing, as I said, for funding, they're competing for people, they're competing for press releases. and actually a bit more of a cohesive, we're in this together and this is a long-term play. We're not going to fix anything overnight. There's nothing you could do now that will make material impact in the next 6 months, really. Like, we're in this in a long-term play here. So let's all think a bit more long-termist about it versus, you know, people hear skills or people hear we've got a diversity problem, they shove a few 100,000 into a scheme. Does that work overall? Is that valuable? Probably not, right? There needs to be a much bigger collective pool. So again, I think the fact that we're having these conversations is great. I think individuals, again, we're starting to do lots more focus groups. I think the more people can start communicating, being a bit more open to working and cross-working, you know, broadcasters working together, aligning versus this very competitive nature of what we do. There'll always be a degree of competition. There has to be. We'll always compete for audiences. We shouldn't be competing and straining the workforce in the way we are. We've got to treat them much better, you know? So again, I think I would just urge people before they, you know, do a kind of, I've got some cash to spend, I want to do a scheme, chuck it into this. Really just sit down and think and talk to our screen skills, you know, what would help right now? Where are the gaps? What data do you have to show us? Is this the right thing to be investing in right now, or isn't it? Because I think just, again, how we're deploying capital just isn't very future proofed. So I think partnerships is a big thing, and strengthening how we talk. I think looking at the regions is super important, and localized delivery. Again, lots is centralized around London. It's crazy. It doesn't need to be. There are incredible facilities and incredible crew all over the, you know, length and breadth of the UK, and we need to make sure that we're working ways to deploy to them. You know, what you're doing, Red Balloon, is a prime example. How can we have kind of localized on the ground experts? And the clusters is a really interesting approach to that, who can deploy training, but locally, because ultimately, even if you had one big body looking at a kind of broader strategy of a North Star, there has to be local implementation. They know the crews, they know the people on the ground, they know how to access those right pools of talent. And that's really important, that people feel like they've got a base and they're not having to get on a train and go to London. You know, I have people saying to me a lot, it's easier for me to go off to LA for a few weeks than it is to try and get a job in London. Like, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy that crew are having to leave versus get jobs in their own hometowns, you know?
I mean, I think also one of the things the RTS have done over the last few years is the bursary scheme, which obviously helps support students, you know, with funding. Yeah. But alongside that, they get a mentor, an industry mentor.
So valuable.
And I think that has been, you know, a really good scheme. But again, it's, you know, it's just another, well, you know, it's a valuable,
really valuable
thing, but it's you know, a piece in a jigsaw, isn't it? In a much bigger jigsaw that you're trying to kind of put together, really.
But I think first and foremost, the industry has come together, and that's great. But now they need to, like I say, look at the funds, address where the real critical pillars are that they need to be putting that fund into, and then they need to kind of deploy that strategy out to everyone. This is what we need to do. This is where we need to go. You know, doesn't mean people have to take that advice, but at least knowing there is some sort of strategic direction for where we should be going to hit a longer term goal. Because to your point, we're an incredibly valuable industry. And, you know, the sector vision laid out by the government and what they want us to achieve over the next kind of 5 years is significant. You know, we generate a lot of revenue for the country, right? So we're a very important industry. And lots of people say the UK punches above its weight. I don't think we do punch above our weight, right? I think we're genuinely one of the best countries in the world when it comes to innovation, the crews, the cast, the facilities, but others are quickly coming up behind us, you know, quickly coming up behind us. They're cottoning on to, and you're seeing it a lot in the press, there's lots of new tax incentives popping up all over the world because people realise that is the secret sauce to get the inward investment coming in. We've got an incredible tax environment here. We have an incredible economic environment to attract inward investors. But the truth is, if we can't provide crew who are skilled to a level that can deliver quality, on a basis that reduces your risk, therefore they are trained to the level they need to be to manage big investments, manage big crews, you know, people aren't going to keep coming here. And that's a real worry for me. There are some significant players in the market moving, and it is not unimaginable that in the next, you know, 20, 30 years, people move away from the UK to these other places. So we've got to stay ahead of the curve. We really have to. It's really critical.
Because we've seen some big investments in studios, particularly.
Massive,
you know, and there's going to be a lot of virtual production going on. All those will need, you know, I think they're talking about something like 40,000 people they're going to need over the next 5, 10 years just to service those sort of studio spaces.
Yeah.
And is that all going to come from freelance people? We're going to have to start employing people properly on proper contracts, aren't they? Is that the future? Kind of less freelance?
It's really hard to say. I think if in a perfect world, my personal view is how lovely if we didn't have to have freelance and everyone could be employed, everyone could have access to some of the amazing perks of not having to constantly want to know where your next job is coming from.
Yeah.
Lots of freelancers love that. That's why they're freelance. They love the ability that they can work with Apple tomorrow, Disney next week, BBC, that flexibility is fantastic for some people. It's not for everyone, but certainly in fully employed life is also not for some people. They love traveling around the world with their jobs. So it's really hard to say if that's the future. I think we will always have a substantial freelance workforce. All of these big facilities need absolutely staff to manage those facilities. But I think in terms of actual nuts and bolts of production, you're always going to need a freelance workforce. So how do we future-proof for them? How do we make them feel like they are being invested in, cared for, looked after? To your point on the mental well-being, it's really shocking to me, again, seeing the resource you have access to in the corporate world versus freelance. And you just think, hang on a minute, without these guys, there would be no business, right?
Yeah.
And I think people have seen them as a slightly disposable workforce, and they're not, right? They really are critical to our future. So we have to look after these people and their trajectory and invest in their career and their development in the same way you would anyone in a corporate environment.
Yeah, I agree. And I think maybe in the same way that, the Albert Initiative in terms of, making the way we all work greener and more sustainable, because we all know we should be doing it, but until you're kind of forced to kind of do these things, I think, we're perhaps a bit reluctant to do it, and everybody sees, oh, it will cost more money. So maybe it just we need that push. Perhaps the industry needs that push from, to do it and kind of force us to just work in a slightly more sustainable way, or slightly, a lot more sustainable way.
You hit the nail on the head though. It's a really interesting industry because on one hand, I think we're the most innovative, future-facing, constantly adapting from maybe a tech perspective. But broadly, production still works today as it did years ago. We haven't really moved on. And to your point on, trying to bring in sustainability policies, and it's slow moving. And it comes back to who is responsible for making sure that happens. And it's really hard because I get there's a business that's ticking, you need hours delivered. But we have to future-proof. We just have to. Not just for the good of the planet in that example, but because, again, others are realising this, other territories are realising this, who are creating really lovely economic environments for producers to go, and they will go there. So we've got to really keep ahead of the curve. We're really dominant right now, and I would like the UK to retain that position. And
so what advice would you give to young people, our students, as you've been talking to some today? What are their sort of worries and concerns, you think? Are they getting the vibes that we're getting about the industry? How should they kind of approach their sort of start of their career, do you think?
I think there's a really glorious optimism, and so should there be at the stage of the people that we're talking to today, the students, because as I said, the market is cyclical and we're so resilient. It's really quite incredible how much we can weather the storm. But my advice is always be open-minded, and I say it to everyone, it's just, again, the trajectory I came through. I think really understand the mechanics of television. And I don't just mean the production mechanics. I mean, how do you even fund your show? How do you monetize your show? How do you retain your IP? If you're going to build a business, how do you make sure you retain ownership of that business? Because these are all the building blocks that will lead you to be profitable versus not. And I think, again, it's the bit that people probably lose sight of because, again, enabling your creativity whilst you're here is brilliant, because whilst you're here you don't have to worry about commissioners breathing down your neck. If you're over budget, you're not going to have a fight with a broadcaster about who's paying your overages, right? But it's really good practice to understand the commercial business behind the business, because it really props it up and to a degree dictates quite a lot of the trends, dictates where people are going to get funding, how they're going to work, how many hours are getting made. And I think people underestimate how powerful that side of the business is and how much they should understand that world and that network. You're seeing now a real pivot back towards co-productions and people having to go out and get minimum guarantees and sell their shows again, which we haven't had to do for 7 years because streamers have bought everything and paid for everything. And again, the savvy producers that understand that are the ones that are going to survive. And people who are quite new into the industry and came up through Amazon and Netflix fully buying everything and have never had to go out and find money are really struggling.
Right.
They don't know those people. They don't know how to monetize. They don't understand the value of their IP. They're going to really struggle. So I think, understanding that it is a commercial business. We are a big commercial business, really big and very significant. And it is about understanding how you are ultimately going to, yes, win people audience, but ultimately make them money. That is what this is about, right? And you have to understand that and understand the mechanics behind it, I think, if you're going to really future-proof yourself.
That's quite hard when you come in just as a young person and you just want to make
Of
films
course,
and you
just want to make stuff.
You know, you want to be creative and kind of, but
Yeah.
you're right, it's a business, and
just-
and without the money,
Yeah.
you ain't going to make anything, are you? So
I think it's just a good thing. But again, it's where, you know, environments like Bournemouth are so valuable because students can come in. They can be wholeheartedly creative. They can really push the boundaries. And I did that when I was here. You come in and you don't really know what your taste is, or what you don't know because you've never made a show before. You don't even know what that looks like, you know. So really understanding yourself, your voice, and understanding what you want to do, you can do here in a very safe environment, and that should be completely encouraged. You know, that kind of safe environment is a real luxury and something that should be encouraged, and the students are very lucky to have it. But also having an eye of, when you come out of here, you do need to understand how to monetize ultimately, you know, if you're going to be successsul, depending on what your level of success that you want, you know.
Yeah, no, that's really good advice. That's great. So what for you now then, Georgia? What's in the pipeline for you? Or you
Who knows?
Not sure at the moment? Are you just kind of keeping your options open?
Who knows? I'm just, obviously I'm doing continuing with the next phase of our skills task force, and then continue to advise on various projects. But yes, who knows for the moment.
You're a busy
Watch
lady.
this space.
You're a busy person.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for today.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
No, it's
Thank
been
you.
lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.